Fieldcraft normally gets you closer to your quarry. With wildfowling, Fieldcraft keeps you alive. Out here is where things can go horribly wrong unless you know what you're doing. There's no substitute for experience, and as we prepare to head off across the mud in the dark, Nick explains the simplest way of finding the pole star, so you'll always know which way is up.
That's the Big Dipper there.
Yep.
You've got the 1, 2, 3 stars at the bottom, or the plough as it's sometimes called, and if you go up to what would be like the handle of the plough, you see there are 2 stars there.
Yep.
And if you multiply that distance between those 2 stars by roughly 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times, you see that faint star there?
Yeah, I see him.
That's the pole star.
Yep.
If you can see the plough and you can find that star, you know now that that's north.
Yeah. You know, I will just rely on other forms of navigation, for instance a phone, GPS, all this kind of stuff, whereas that's kind of the old school trick that I suppose I suppose only people that, not of Nick's age, but people that have, pensioners like Nick, that kind of would be used to doing. So he agrees with me that it's important that he passes down as much of his knowledge as he can to other members of the club.
It feels more like a school field trip than a hunting outing. Matt, who back in those days no doubt sat on the back seats of the bus making hand signals at passing cars, is excited about the bioluminescence as we kick through the water. That's a word he didn't know in those days either. The camera doesn't do it justice, but it is a first for Matt. And a long word like that is a first for Fieldsports Channel too. We walk about a mile across the mud. It's not too tough, but you still have to be careful. Matt and Nick set up away from each other, and then it's time to wait and hope.
A series of creeks and sheltered little runnels out there that goes on for about 3 miles. You've got the pools on the main marsh over there, but behind us is a large freshwater pond, which is mainly where the mallard will be going.
If we do get a shot, Nick has an old school favourite in which he can use his Ely bismuth. Matt has the Benelli Super Black Eagle 2.
To prove, if any ducks materialise, how effective Ely bismuth shot is, I'm using my 2 3/4 inch chambered Webley & Scott 700 game gun, and I brought it out today because I'm trying to cure myself of magnemitis. I've been using modern guns and steel shot since it first came into being in the late 80s and early 90s, before it became a legal requirement to use. And in the early days you had to use 3.5 inch cartridges and big shot because the components were not properly matched at that stage, and the powders were not properly developed. And I kind of got into the habit of using these big cartridges for everything. But of course there's been so many developments in the meantime that mean that you can quite comfortably use shorter cartridge lengths, lighter loads. I was using some Ely 2 3/4 inch steel cartridges the other day on the foreshore and was surprised at how effective they were. And here I am today with a 25 inch barreled 2 3/4 inch chambered game gun with a 2.5 inch paper cased Ely bismuth cartridge in it, and every expectation that if a bird comes past within killable range and I can hit it, then it's as good as dead.
There are birds, but they are fast and low, and the cloudless sky means there's no contrast, so they are gone as soon as we spot them or hear wing beats. Matt does get off a few shots, but nothing falls. There's only a small window of opportunity out here, and in no time, the chaps call time. Before we head back, Nick, who is also a Benelli owner, explains the proper way to get your shells in an inertia-operated semi-auto.
A lot of people who've bought Benellis, as is so often the case with men, have never bothered to read the manual. And the manual will actually tell you in some detail how to load a semi-automatic Benelli, but most people who've been brought up on gas operated semis will stick with the method that they know and love. It works, but the correct method of loading, in this case the SPE2, is as follows. Firstly, close the breech, insert the 2 cartridges in the magazine tube, and then the 3rd cartridge you pull back on the breech, drop the cartridge in the chamber and let it go. And what that means is that the very last thing that you do with that breech bolt is to let it slam shut. And because it's got the rotating bolt head, one of the issues with this particular design of gun is that if it doesn't shut properly, it'll do that. Now, I'm not going to chance this, but if I was to pull the trigger with the bolt in that position, it wouldn't work, because it's actually got another almost half an inch to go before it's correctly closed. And once it's shut properly, everything is in the correct relative position. The base of the cartridge is home in the chamber. The bolt head and the firing pin are in the appropriate place, and if I was to pull the trigger now, the gun would fire. So that's a quick overview of the correct Benelli loading sequence. Many of us, if you're in a tight corner and you find that you've emptied the gun, and I'm just going to unload it to demonstrate this to you. You can imagine that the bolt is locked back, you've fired 3 shots, the gun's empty, and let's just, for the sake of the argument, say that you wanted to speed load it and not do it in the way that I demonstrated a moment ago, and you were going to load it like a conventional gas operated rather than an inertia operated shotgun. If you drop the cartridge in there, and all you need to do is just touch the back of the cartridge and the breech closes. I'll just demonstrate that to you again. Open breech, cartridge, just drop it in any old how, touch the back of the cartridge, and away she goes. And at that point, to complete the loading sequence, it's the other 2 up the magazine, and you can see, because the breech slammed shut as it did when I just touched the back of the cartridge, you can see that that's properly closed, ready to rock and roll.
With the guns unloaded and a strong desire for a coffee, we head back. We have nothing to show for our efforts, but we did get a lesson in astronomy. We witnessed some of the wonders of the marine world. We enjoyed a few moments reflection, listening to a top musician, and we started and finished with a decent workout. An enriching morning when you think about it.